I have spent some time reading through the Broom Dog, and I would like to spend some time discussing some of the things that I think are important for the comprehension questions that you are going to be answering for this assignment. So if you want to go ahead and open up your comprehension questions document that you're going to be responding on and uploading back to your teacher as your assignment for this lesson, you might want to do that so that it'll be easier for you to do that. So the first question that you have is about the author's craft. And the question says, what do you notice about the structure and style of the introduction, and how is it like a poem? So you might have noticed in the introduction that there were a number of things talking about a school bus. You can notice that there's repetition of words, there's repetition of phrases, and the sentence structure is very similar in the introduction of the story here. You'll also notice that there are some sentence fragments. There are some things that aren't even sentences in this introduction to the story. You're also going to notice that there are some rhythmic type qualities for this introduction, which makes it sound very much like a poem. So you can kind of hear how it has a little bit of a rhythm to it as you are reading the introduction to the story. One of the things that you might have also noticed in the introduction to the story is there is a lot of figurative language. It is packed with figurative language. And actually, the second question in your comprehension packet actually asks you about that. It says, choose any 3 things to which the writer compares a school bus. For each, explain what you think the author means. So these are metaphors, and a few days ago you watched a video about metaphors, and you can see that the introduction to this story is packed full of metaphors. A couple that I thought stood out to me that I thought were kind of funny and interesting to me was the one where it says, the school bus is a student's version of a teacher's lounge. When I think about a teacher's lounge, I think about that as a place for me to go and get food and make copies and kind of talk to other teachers, and it is a place for me to go and relax. So I think about that being a place that students can go when they're on the school bus. So I thought that was a good metaphor that the writer used. I also thought it was an interesting metaphor when the writer said that a school bus is like a talent show. And I thought about last year's 5th and 6th grade talent show and how some of you got up and did your talent and how you liked being up there and being the center of attention. And I think about being on a school bus sometimes, and I think there are some students that are on a school bus at times that like to be the center of attention. And I thought that was an interesting thing that the author did when they were comparing a school bus to a talent show. The next question in your comprehension packet actually asks about the purpose of these sentences in the introduction, and I want to talk a little bit about that now. I think that the author was trying to set the stage for the setting of this story. Was part of the reason why the author wrote these sentences, but also towards the end of the introduction, the author starts to introduce the main character to us through this by telling us who Canton is, who is the main character of this story. And also the author does a very interesting thing at the very, very end. The author actually does introduce to us what Canton's conflict is in the story. Now, the author doesn't come right out and tell us what happens to Canton's mother, but we can see that there is going to be some type of conflict when something like a thing that almost destroyed him is said by an author in a story, we know that there's going to be some type of conflict. So the author does a couple of things. He introduces the main character and introduces the actual conflict in the story. Now, we've talked about metaphors, and we're also going to talk about similes. Remember, a metaphor and a simile are almost the same thing. It's just that when you have a simile, you want to use the term like or as in your simile. So the next question kind of refers to a simile in the story. And there are some lines in the story that I want to reread for you. They are on page 28, and they are in the second column at the top. And here's what it says. And hearing it was like hearing the world's longest whistle blow, shrill, shredding his eardrums. His skin was crawling, felt like it was changing color, from brown to yellow, school bus yellow. Now, number 4 asks the question, what do these lines reveal about Canton in this moment? How do the whistle and the color yellow connect to what is happening? Well, as you can tell, they are similes. You can hear the word like in both of those sentences, and they are comparing two things to be similar to each other. Okay, when they compare the whistle, it's kind of interesting how they're comparing that to the whistle that his mom uses when she is a crossing guard. And then obviously they tell you right away what they're using and doing with the color yellow. It's like the school bus that hit his mom. He's having these terrifying feelings when he learns about his mom's accident. And his whole world now is focusing in on the accident, and the author uses these similes to express how Canton is feeling during this time. Remember, when we read stories, we always want to try to make connections to the story, and the author is helping you do that with the next part that I'm going to talk with you about. There's a part at the very bottom of this page on column 3 where it starts talking about Mr. Munch and about how Mr. Munch helped Canton around the school. I want you to listen to these words. Canton and Mr. Munch sauntered the halls of the school, pushing dust and hair that looked like dust, and coins and candy wrappers, and a random sock, and drawstrings, and loose braids, and who knows what else, as the other students bustled around, eventually funneling through the doors into the outside world. So, why do you think the author includes these details? Well, I think the author includes these details so that you can make connection as the reader to the school and what it's like to be at school. It's probably pretty easy for you to make that connection, thinking back to all the things that you might see on the floor of our school and all the hustle and bustle that happens when everyone is leaving our school at the end of the day. So the author's just trying to help you make some connections to the setting of the story with these words. And also, the author usually tries to help you connect with the characters in the story, too. You probably have already connected with Canton a little bit because he's a student in a school. You probably haven't connected with him because most of you haven't had your parent or your mother hit by a school bus, at least I hope you haven't. But in this case, he's actually trying to help you connect to Mr. Munch a little bit and help you understand maybe a little bit more about what he is like. And the question says, what kind of person is Mr. Munch? Support your answer with details from the story. Now, listen to these words. It says he was thinking Mr. Munch was trying to be his emotional support dog, except not a dog. Now, we all know what support therapy dogs are. We had a great dog at the beginning of the year in our classroom once a week, and we all miss her very, very much. So we all know what an emotional therapy dog is in Dynasty. So we all can connect to that. We all can understand what Mr. Munch was maybe trying to do with being an emotional support dog for Canton. So we can kind of understand that Mr. Munch might be a kind person. He might be thoughtful. He might be compassionate, especially wanting to reach out and help Canton in his time of need since his mom's been hurt. He also talks about, in the story, the author talks about how Mr. Munch got his wife a therapy dog, and how he talks a lot about how Mr. Munch loves his wife and how he was trying to help his wife. So it doesn't come right out and tell us exactly what Mr. Munch is like. We have to try to indirectly figure out what this character is like, because we have to see from his actions and what he says and things that he does to be able to figure out what his characteristics are like. And that's a little bit harder to do when you are trying to find out what a character is like, when it's more of an indirect characterization that the author is using to help you understand the character. The next question is an inferencing question, and now we know when we inference that we have to use our background knowledge. Okay, so I want you to think a little bit about things that maybe have helped you in the past when you were struggling with something. What is something that you relied on that was a thing, maybe not necessarily a person, but maybe a thing that you might have used now or in the past that was kind of a support for you? So this question says, how does the Broom dog help Canton? So based on your background knowledge, you kind of have this idea in your head maybe of something that's helped you. And I want you to think, when you answer this question, how does the Broom dog help Canton? Well, I think about when I was young, or when my daughter was young, and how stuffed animals helped me and helped my daughter. And I think about how when I was struggling, or when my daughter was struggling, or when we might have been sad, and our stuffed animals were important to us. And we used our stuffed animals as a way to help us feel better and just something to comfort us. And so I think maybe the Broom dog became like a stuffed animal for Canton. That was just something that I was thinking maybe. So now we're going to do a little comparing between Canton's observations for his assignment to the story's introduction. And we're trying to look and see what those two things have in common. And I was noticing that they both require for you to make observations about how the students are interacting. Okay, so he's noticing how they are interacting on the bus, and the author is doing that with the introduction, and Canton is noticing how the students are interacting at the bus stop with his assignment. In this next question, we're going to talk a little bit about Canton's feelings about the Broom dog, and how did those feelings change, and then maybe what else has his feelings changed about. So I was noticing as the story went along that the Broom dog was something he wasn't so sure about in the beginning, wasn't really sure why Mr. Munch was giving him the Broom dog. Then I noticed the Broom dog became pretty important to him, and then I noticed at the very end of the story that the Broom dog really wasn't that as important to him. He was just tossing it up and down in the air. And I thought that was an interesting change over the course of the story for Canton and this Broom dog. And I thought, well, I could think about how Canton might have felt about this situation with his mom's accident and the bus. I thought, well, maybe Canton is feeling kind of the same about the bus. In the beginning, he wasn't so sure about what was going to happen with his mom and being hit by the bus. And then he really was relying and worried a lot about his mom and her situation, and she was getting better. But then as she got better and she was able to go back to work and things got back to normal, then he wasn't so